Hi, everybody. Welcome to our PsychByte presentation today with special guest Gabe Howard. Gabe Howard is an award-winning writer and speaker who lives with bipolar and anxiety disorders. He's a host of the weekly podcast and show, the Psych Central Show, and he co-hosts a bipolar, a schizophrenic, and a podcast, which explores life through the unique double lens of a young woman living with schizophrenia and a guy living with bipolar. He also writes for WebMD, Psych Central, Bipolar Magazine, and other distinguished publications. You can connect with him at gabehoward.com. Hey, Gabe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I've also written for International Bipolar Foundation, so this is awesome.
Yes, you have. Thanks for
Which is a distinguished publication, so.
Thank you. So what I want to start with today was just a little bit about your background and your mental health journey.
Obviously, I have bipolar disorder. That's what brought us all together. It's not the International Schizophrenia Foundation, after all. I wrote that joke all night. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 25, and like so many people, I didn't know. I woke up in a psychiatric ward because of psychosis and suicidality and severe depression, and they were just like, hey, you have bipolar disorder. And the only thing that I knew about bipolar disorder was there was a singer, Kurt Cobain. He was the lead singer of a band called Nirvana. This was so long ago, I have to explain to the youngsters that this was a band. And he had recently died from suicide, and he lived with bipolar disorder. So this was the thing that was prevalent in my mind. We've got a once-in-a-lifetime musical talent. He's wealthy, he's famous, he's surrounded by people, and he couldn't beat bipolar disorder. So as far as I was concerned, I was just a dead man walking. It was very, very hopeless because I couldn't think of one non-negative portrayal. I couldn't think of anybody living well. I couldn't think of anybody doing well. It was very devastatingly lonely. And that was the start of my journey. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened over the next 4 years, which we don't have time to get into. But when I reached recovery, I thought back on that day and I thought, wow, I need to be as loud as humanly possible about beating bipolar disorder, about living well with bipolar disorder, about living in recovery with bipolar disorder. So that way the next person who's diagnosed and wakes up in a psychiatric ward and thinks to themselves, okay, I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but there's this loudmouth redheaded guy on the internet and he seems to be doing okay, so maybe I can do okay too. And that's really what encompasses my entire mission with all of this advocacy. Plus, I get to meet really cool people like you.
Thank you. So with that being said, do you feel that there is a stigma in the male community that kind of prevents men from addressing their mental health? And if so, how have you overcome that?
It's really difficult to wonder if there is a stigma against men, because it's like, oh, we have to have everything. We have this male-centric society where we make more money, where all the CEOs, where male sports are dominating, and then when it comes to sickness, oh wait, we dominate being stigmatized against as well. So there's this little piece of me that's just like, really? We have to win the trophy for being the most discriminated against on top of winning the trophy for being at the top of the food chain. There's this part of me that thinks that this is a little ridiculous. But moving past that for a moment, men are trained from my generation at least, and I understand it's getting better, but I was raised with, men don't cry. Toughen up. We don't talk about our emotions. Get up, get dressed, go to work, don't complain. And we're not really in touch with emotional stuff. Not because of any, biological need, but because of a societal, I don't know. We're just not allowed to be weak, I guess. So when I was first feeling bad, I just really internalized that, because what was I supposed to do? Like go to my dad and say, hi dad, I cry a lot and feel bad. He would have told me to like toughen up. And I'm not saying that to be mean to my dad. I'm saying that because that's what all dads would have said to, most of their sons. it really is just tough. And even after I was diagnosed, when I started going to support groups, there weren't a lot of men around. I would walk into a support group with 15 people. There would be like 2 men, 13 women. And the women would be all ages, from, teenagers to 20-year-olds to, all the way up to senior citizens. And there'd just be a couple of guys. And we were largely observers. I think that does make it tougher because we don't want to talk to our friends about being weak, and mental illness is really seen as being, crazy, weak, pitiful, whatever. There's not a lot of positive interpretations of mental illness. So I suppose if I were a female, or if I were a woman, I could talk to my female friends about my emotions, because I would have been told from a young age that it's okay to lean on your female friends for emotional support. Men are just not raised this way. We're not supposed to need emotional support. So when we desperately, 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 desperately need emotional support, we are trained not to ask for it, which I think puts us in harm's way. Maybe I would have been diagnosed a lot sooner if people would have known how badly I felt. But it wasn't something that I shared with anybody, so everybody thought that I was fine. Well, they knew I wasn't fine. They just thought I was a jerk. They just thought I was just this really erratic, bad person.
Right. Switching gears a little bit, you talk a lot about your beautiful and supportive wife, Kendall. And so there are a lot of questions all the time that come in about healthy relationships, and how do you be a healthy partner when you have a brain that is oftentimes unhealthy. So is there anything you'd like to share about how you and Kendall maintain a healthy relationship?
Yeah, there's a lot to share. The first thing that I want to say, just right out of the gate, is that the rules for a healthy marriage apply whether you have bipolar disorder or any illness. I can't, lie to her and treat her poorly and then be like, oh, bipolar. No, I have to be respectful and honest and open, and, all of the little nuances and rules that every couple in America has to follow to have a healthy relationship. All of those rules apply as well. So that's the first thing I want people to know. All of the rules that every marriage that's healthy has to follow, we have to follow. And then we get a few more. But in a way, we don't get a few more. And here's why I say that. One of the things that I tell people all the time is that the dreaded question, have you taken your medication? I know people with bipolar disorder, people with mental, we hate that question. Did you take your meds? Yeah. It's just really aggravating question. My wife is like the only person on the planet that's allowed to ask. I don't get offended when she asks. I don't get mad when she asks. I just answer the question. Did you take your meds? Yes, I did. That's the end of it. And I allow her to do so because I figure she's not asking unless she has a good reason. I trust her. The next thing is we have to share my illness. It's kind of the unspoken third partner. And I really think that this would be this way if we had any illness. If I had, cancer or a colostomy bag or diabetes, we would have to share information about that illness. Because, for example, let's say that I had diabetes. We'll use that as an example. And my wife said, hey, do you want to go for dessert? I would have to say, hey, my sugar is too high. Or it's right, I planned for it. Or we would have to discuss this to make sure that we made good decisions as a couple so that her husband was not in harm's way. We have to do the same thing with bipolar disorder. So when we first got together, she had to educate herself a lot about the illness. And I had to sign all the waivers. She's allowed to talk to my psychiatrist. She's allowed to talk to my therapist. She's allowed to do all of those things without my permission. And when I say without my permission, I just mean I gave her permission on day one. And that is the trust that I have in her. If for whatever reason you're in a relationship where you don't trust your partner to help you with your serious and persistent medical condition, I know this is not a popular thing to say, but maybe that's not the partner for you, because it's in sickness and in health. And if your partner is unwilling to understand or help you when you are sick, that's a red flag. So again, all of the normal rules apply, plus you have to make adjustments for the illness. Again, just as you have to make adjustments for any illness that befell you and your partner, you have to make adjustments for everything. My wife spends more money than I do. I had to make an adjustment. That has nothing to do with bipolar disorder. We just had to work that out. It's the same thing. Hey, I could go on and on about this forever, but so many people think that there's like some magical thing that is different about bipolar relationships or mental illness relationships than other relationships. Nope, there's not. We're subject to all the same problems. We fight about money. Sometimes we get in arguments about our in-laws, and we never know where we're spending Christmas because we both want to spend it with our own families. That has nothing to do with bipolar disorder. We have all those problems too.
Yeah, I agree. So the next thing I wanted to ask you about is with your work. Many with bipolar have a difficult time finding work that sustains them and doesn't kind of drive them over the edge. You are somebody who I feel has created an environment where it fuels your passions and you're productive, and it also doesn't cause you to go over the edge, whether it's into manic or depressive states. How do you manage this?
The first thing is that, I always tell everybody, don't believe everything you read in Facebook, or I'm sorry, don't believe everything you read on Facebook. Stress has absolutely, made me depressed. It's made me anxious. The medicine has been remarkably good at wiping out mania, but, I certainly have symptoms of bipolar disorder on a day-to-day basis, sometimes just a little bit, sometimes more, and I have to be aware of when to take a break. And that's where self-employment is very helpful to me, or to have a job where your boss understands, that maybe in the middle of the week I need a half day because of bipolar disorder. So the first thing is I got really well first. I think that sometimes because of the way that our society is set up, and because of the lack of understanding about mental health, mental illness, and specifically bipolar disorder, we get people who are diagnosed on Monday and they're expected to go back to work, the next Monday. It's like you've just been diagnosed with a very serious illness. You've been put on your first psychiatric medications, and people are running out trying to get back to work after a couple of weeks. This is not a sustainable plan. I mean, from the time I was diagnosed until the time I reached wellness took 4 years. And that was a lot of work. I mean, I had several outpatient treatments. I was going to a psychiatrist on average of, every other month. I was seeing a therapist. I was going to support groups. I had a really good support system in my friends and family. And I had really, really good health insurance so that I was able to sustain all of this and have a payer source for it. And, finally, I'm in a pretty big city. Some cities don't have outpatient treatment options or daily support groups because, they're rural or they're smaller. And it still took 4 years. But when I got well, then I understood what I could do. I started out in IT, which was very stressful. Working in computers and networking in the 90s, this was back before every 5-year-old knew how to use a computer. This stuff was very, very stressful, and computers filled rooms. And this was my job. And whenever it would break, the whole world would be like freaked out. I mean, think about what happens like when the internet goes down in your building now. Think about that person that you want to yell at because it's broken, and that was me. Except it was for giant companies. So they were losing like millions of dollars. I realized that I just couldn't do it. That kind of stress was way too much for me. And it was very, very difficult to go from the kind of money that I used to be making when I was in information technology down to the kind of money that I made when I was doing nonprofit fundraising. My paychecks were very tiny all of a sudden, but I was happier, and this became the trade-off. And I was able to sustain, and I was able to move up, and I was able to earn more money, eventually. But it was a tough decision. So for me, I found meaningful work that I could sustain in the long term, and I didn't consider things like how much the job pays. And that's a very privileged position. It really is. Not everybody has that. And I think this is one of the problems with our mental health system. I think there's plenty of people that could probably work part-time jobs, but then they can't get health insurance, because in our country, you don't have to have health insurance for a part-time job. So I think that unfortunately, there are a lot of people who absolutely unequivocally want to work 20 hours a week, but because of their medical condition, their serious medical condition, they can't risk losing health care. So shocker, I'm a big proponent of universal health care for this very reason. And there's just so much to say on this subject, but unfortunately, in many places, your choice is either don't work at all or work a full-time job. And for many people, especially within a few years of diagnosis or, right when they reach recovery, they need a ramp up period. They need to be, I started off part-time and I worked my way up over the next decade.
So speaking of what you've been doing self-employment wise, et cetera, what are the projects that you're currently working on? You have a bunch of podcasts and it seems like you're always popping up with something fun to add to the community.
Yeah, it all centers around mental health advocacy. No shock there. Everything kind of feeds into the same thing. First and foremost, I'm a speaker. I love to get up in front of an audience and say, "Hi, my name is Gabe Howard. I live with bipolar disorder," and then pause and just watch the, "Are you sure?" More than one person has told me that I don't look like I'm mentally ill. Well, you don't look bipolar. You don't sound bipolar. You don't act bipolar. And, I always say when I was acting bipolar, I wasn't able to get on an airplane and come and speak at your event because, I was busy jumping off roofs and staying awake for 4 days at a time. So this is what somebody who is in recovery with bipolar disorder looks like. So we have to understand the difference there. I think a lot of society believes that every single person with bipolar disorder acts exactly the same way at all times, which is nonsense. It's just incredible nonsense. And that's the goal of, speaking, writing. That's the goal of the podcast. I have the two podcasts. One's the Psych Central show. It's a flagship podcast over at Psych Central. And it's really designed to get experts to explain psychology, mental health, and mental illness in a way that a layperson can digest it. So we take somebody that speaks up here, we just push them down to our level so that we can learn these topics and destigmatize them. And then a bipolar, a schizophrenic, and a podcast is pretty much the exact opposite. It's a lot of our opinions. How do we feel about living in society with me with bipolar and her with schizophrenia? How do we feel about being mental health advocates? How do we feel when we hear politicians say, that all gun violence is the result of people with mental illness? Or how stressful is it to not be thought of as well? Because after all, you've got like an asterisk. It's like, well, Gabe is doing fine, asterisk. Like, why can't I just do well? Why does everybody have to wait for the other shoe to drop? And these are things that people in our community really want to talk about. And you can see why it's not really covered in mainstream media or pop culture, because believe it or not, we're kind of a small community. And that's why we really love that. Plus we can swear. I love swearing on the internet. It was rating it M for mature was the smartest thing that we ever did. But again, it's about getting those conversations out in the open. There's so much shame. I talk to people with bipolar disorder and, they pull me aside and they're like, I did X when I was manic and I feel so horrible. And I'm like, I understand, but you were sick and you have come a long way since then. And they're like, but I'm so ashamed that I can't even talk about it. And I'm, unfortunately, as much as we need to celebrate our success, we need to come to terms with our failures, because that's the only way that we can move past those traumas. And by never talking about it, it makes it worse, and it gives these things just way more power than they deserve to have. So I take the hit for that. And so does Michelle, and so do people like you, and there's so many of us, and we're just trying to set an example so maybe the next person, and not even maybe, absolutely the next person will feel empowered to say, I made a mistake, but that doesn't define me. And then they will go on and do good as well. And this whole thing moves forward. Because eventually I'm going to get old and die. But not today. This is still my world for now. You can have it when I'm done.
Oh my. Well, for anybody who is listening and curious about finding you in these podcasts, where can they go?
GabeHoward.com is definitely the best place to go. Go to GabeHoward.com and you can find everything. The two podcasts are officially listed at PsychCentral.com/show for the Psych Central show and PsychCentral.com/BSP for a bipolar, schizophrenic, and a podcast. But yeah, hang out at GabeHoward.com. You can get one of these cool shirts too. And they're really, I think I have a mug somewhere. I mean, I just keep these handy. I don't know, just randomly. Did I mention I have stickers? I mean, just in case they come up. This is it. This is all I own clothing wise. I only wear my own brand. No, but seriously, head over to gabehoward.com and check it out. And go to WebMD and Bipolar Magazine. There are so many great people writing about living with bipolar disorder. And I love it because I learn from people every day. Just when I think I know everything there is to know about living with bipolar disorder, I'll pop up a blog like on International Bipolar Foundation. I'll be like, oh my God, I do that. That's totally me. And plus, it's great to have a community. Again, when I was diagnosed, I felt so alone. It took me a year to share the same space with another person with my diagnosis. And that was just such an incredibly lonely year. So I'm so thankful for organizations like this and people because, being able to talk to somebody who's been diagnosed with the same thing as you and talk to them about how they're managing and commiserate it's so valuable. It's more valuable than I ever would have realized.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You've been a great ally to me in my own journey. So I appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And Aubrey, you are fantastic.
Thank you.